Because of the delay in the dredge that we experienced last summer, I guess it was, we had we had enough time to go back and rethink some things. One of the concerns that came up last time we had everybody together and they actually voted on the plan, and voted overwhelmingly to proceed with it. We talked about, had quite a discussion about a canal and some of the shallow areas there. Well, having this dredge delayed gave us the opportunity to go back and look at that again. It also gave us some time to get a permit in place, get that added to the permit application and get that work approved, and you'll hear more about that. That's why we need to meet today, okay? Also, there's an opportunity that you'll hear more about because we're going to have a dredging contractor on site with all the equipment needed to build docks, to install, pull and replace pilings, sleeve pilings, things like that. There are certain economies of scale that can be benefited from by having as many folks who are interested get that work done, and you'll hear more about that. All that requires permits, and permits take time, and so that, again, that's why we're here today. This meeting is being filmed, and it'll be put on Mariners. Yes, it is, I'm sorry. This meeting is being filmed, and it'll be placed on the marinerscovewhidbey.com website. And then any of you who do live near folks who are on the canal or not, but are not home right now, tell them about it, okay? So they can be aware of what we have going on, and they can certainly get involved or take advantage of it if they choose. And then if you have any questions, be sure you ask any of us up here, okay? We're more than happy to help. Okay. So here is our order of march. We're going to be sure everybody knows the team, everybody on the team that's working on this project. We have a few folks that haven't been involved with this before or are new. We're going to talk a little bit about the background of the dredge. As I mentioned, the scope of the dredge has changed, okay? We actually now plan to do more work. John will talk in detail about the original plan, how that was developed, and now how it has been modified so we can do more of the work in a canal. We're going to talk about just where we are with the permit and some of the difficulties we've had to work through as we get closer and closer to having the permit issued to us. We want to introduce to you some of the professional resources that we have available from the marine science, marine engineering, and construction trades that have been integral in this project from the beginning, really. Then we'll talk about this opportunity for homeowners to build docks, replace pilings, any other thing they might want to consider and how they could get involved with that, get started on that. Lastly, we will have Q&A, and when we have Q&A, we want to ask everybody to please hold your questions till the end, and then when we do have questions, wait until you get the mic, and as I'm learning, keep the mic up close to your mouth, and then we'll get your question answered because it needs to be recorded, okay? All right. First slide. So we've got Mariners Cove trustees in the room. I'm not sure everybody's aware of who we all are. Would you raise your hands, please? I see Paula, President John on Architectural, Fred, Waterways, John, Vice President, Karen, Treasurer. Did I miss anybody? Oh, I'm sorry, Sandy in Grounds, and of course, Jerry, Secretary. Okay, and then Wayne's just come on board as alternate on water systems. Yeah, Paul Bellinger's group. Okay. And so we have the Waterways Committee, and Fred Lemke, our harbor master, I appreciate in Fred his engineering background, and if you work with him, he's a real servant, and he has an extremely practical problem-solving ability, which is just wondrously helpful. Karen, our treasurer, also on the Waterways Committee, background in finance accounting and financial oversight. Would that be correct?
Auditing.
Yeah, auditing, okay. Jerry, secretary, okay, she attends all the meetings, keeps us on track, keeps notes, always asks lots of questions. John Ginn, here, Vice President, if you work with John, his attention to detail is absolutely unbelievable. And he's quite a workhorse, too. It's just great. All the presentation materials he tends to take strong ownership of and produce something that works very well. I'm in my late 60s, and I've benefited from mentors my whole life in business. I'm in my late 60s, and I have a mentor, Mr. Lundstrom over there. And Bob will pull me aside. Bob will say, hey, I think you need to be thinking about this, or don't do that, or whatever. And it's been fun working with Bob. He was a long-time chair of the Waterways Committee and continues to be involved. Myself, I'm enjoying this. I spent 45 years working in commercial horticulture. I spent 28 years with a very big company. If you know the nursery business, particular stuff that's grown in containers, you're talking big acreages, millions and millions of gallons of water, all has to be pumped out of the river or the ground. It has to be treated, it has to be recycled, it has to be filtered. So I'm comfortable with and familiar with canals and ponds and irrigation systems and all that. So we have a nice balance, and things seem to be coming along pretty well. All right, down at the end here, Amy Lietman with Marine Services and Marine Surveys and Assessments. And man, how many years have you been working with us? Yeah, a long time. And so those of you that don't know, they're located over in Port Townsend. They work with a lot of waterfront communities and businesses. So, and highly skilled, and they just have been wonderful to work with. To Amy's left, Brian DeCaterina. Also, Brian is, you're the main diver, is that right? Yeah, and Brian is here today to answer any questions. Then also, he's George Lullum, the principal of Blackwater Marine Construction, is out of the country. So George asked Brian to represent Blackwater because you're going to need to learn a little bit more about how this dredge is going to happen, and we can help you with that. And then if you're interested in any of this custom construction work, be reaching out to him as well. Okay. A little bit of background. All right, as I mentioned earlier, the work began really in 2009, and what's important to know is one of the guiding foundational principles that the community and through the community the board put in place was we need to get a dredge done, but what we would like to do is fund it out of annual dues and avoid if at all possible, any special assessments. Assessments can be surprising, they can be significant, and they can just be problematic to deal with at times. So it was, since that time, the funding strategy has been through annual dues, increases in annual dues, accumulation of reserves that could be used to fund the dredge. And we've accomplished quite a lot. In May of 2018, the board, I was not a part of it at that time, the board finalized a dredge plan, sectors 1, 2, 3, 4, and 7, not sectors 5 and 6. And that was put together based on detailed bathymetric surveys, and John's going to get into that in quite some detail here shortly. That plan was put together. Funding plan was put together as well. That was presented to the board and then ultimately to the members, and that was approved. In 2020, the board decided to delay to November of 2022 the dredge so we could build some additional funds. But in 2021, I know I certainly experienced it. I was relatively new, fairly new to the committee at that time, but working with Amy, Amy, you had commented on it too. It's just getting more difficult to get permits in place. More time consuming, more costly, and we began to get concerned that we need to move this thing up if we can. If we can afford it, let's move it up so we can get it done while we can get it done, which we did. All right. Not long after we made that decision, we ran into some issues with within agencies. Okay, we deal with through Amy, I don't know, 6 or 8 count. Okay, yeah, 8 county, state, and federal agencies: Fish and Wildlife, Army Corps of Engineers, Island County. There are a number of them. Department of Natural Resources, and within those agencies began to experience turnover. Some of it was likely COVID related. You know, people were sick, offices were shut down, and that really slowed down the volume of work. We've heard about all the numbers of people changing jobs. So there have been all kinds of times that, or a number of times that Amy's made me aware folks she's been dealing with are no longer there. So you kind of start over again to some degree. It was very difficult to even maintain or find somebody that could give us information regarding the status of our permit. That's recently changed. But this became so significant, as we reported at our last meeting in this room, that it affected virtually all marine construction projects in the Northwest and down into California. It got so significant that the Oregon and Washington congressional delegations began to pressure Army Corps of Engineers, NOAA Fisheries, and others to break through the logjam. And I'm not sure if that's actually been accomplished, but it's getting a bit better, would you say, Amy? Okay, slowly. All right. So we felt fairly confident last year that we would get our permit issued. But I recall saying there's a good deal of doubt that we might, based on how we're feeling about things, we may not get it, and that's exactly what happened. So once that happened, that opened the door to go back to some things that had come up. Quite the discussion that we had at the members' meeting about the need to go back into A Canal and address some of the shallow areas there. And the members said, we support the plan that you have before us, get it done. But the members said, we want to register our concern and our support to go back into A Canal and get that work done as well. And so, team, you'll need to put a plan together to get that. Well, the 1-year delay has given us the opportunity to do that, and we'll get into detail how we're going to pay for that, the types of volumes we're going to be talking about, exactly where that work will occur, and so on. Okay? John, I think I'm done.
Okay, if I can keep up with the slides here. Many of you who've attended these meetings before would recognize this slide. Just to kind of bracket where we are at, we started in 2018 when the board made the decision to do what we could consider an abbreviated dredge scope. And based on the growing need for an entrance dredge, the board kind of figured that, hey, if we got to have a dredger come for the entrance, why don't we just bump the canal dredge up and take advantage of mobilization synergies? And so that at that time in 2018, the board made the key decision to move the dredge up from 2026 to 2021 and to change the funding strategy to include loan funding. It was felt that loan funding would actually place the burden of responsibility for maintenance of the canals not only on existing owners but future owners, given that we'll have 15 years to pay the loan off. And so that loan funding strategy was incorporated into the thinking that had been done previously. The dredge scopes alternatives were discussed in some detail with MSA and CGS. Coastal Geologic Surveys is a subcontractor to MSA. We have actually dealt directly with CGS in the past. They've been a great partner, both for us, and I hope Amy would agree, for MSA too. But in those discussions, it was ultimately decided, the scope that you see here was ultimately what was decided. And during the member annual review meeting, or annual business meeting last May 15th, the members approved this plan by a wide majority. But at the same time, at that meeting and at informational meetings prior to that, the board was really, awareness was heightened about the need to do something about the rest of the canals. And so the silver lining in the dysfunction in the regulatory authorities is that we have been able to do something about that. But first let me say, why were 5 and 6 not in the original plan? I've just said a few words about that, but I think this will also help. In discussions with MSA and CGS, it was determined that there's a natural scour. If you look from the entrance straight down the waterway, that's a canal, and there's a natural scour created by the ebb and flow of the tide that helps keep moving the sediment back and forth and pretty much away from the homes on a canal. You can see that in the bottom. Oh, I'm sorry, I shifted the wrong slide. Gotta keep me honest on that, Mark. This slide is also, you've seen this one too before, but if you look at the 2014 image on the bottom, you can see the blue on a canal, and that blue is felt to be a result of the natural scour created by the ebb and flow of the tide, straight across the dam, all the way to the end of a canal. Yeah. Blue, the deeper it is. Yes, thank you. Yeah, and so if you look at the image from 2014 compared to the bathymetrics that were done in 2019, certainly there's evidence that of additional sedimentation in B Canal. B Canal had some blue in it before. It's hard to find blue now. And bear in mind, this bathymetrics was in 2019, is now 3 years old. So there's additional sedimentation that could likely have occurred, and that's something that we'll talk about when and if we start talking about overdredge. But at any rate, this is the rationale that was used. Now, like I said, and Mark has said, there's a silver lining to the dysfunction created by the regulatory authorities, and I won't say their names, but it's NOAA Fisheries. So the upside is that we've now been able to revise the scope of the dredge. Now, what we've done was we have maximized to the fullest, absolute maximum potential, the volumes permitted in the dredge material management units that were created originally. They're called DMMUs. You can't see them on this image. Oops, wrong way, wrong file. You can't see them on this image, but you can see them here. They're orange DMMUs. There's DMMU 1 and DMMU 2. DMMU 2 isn't going to help us with A Canal. DMMU 1, we drilled into that, and we found that there was potential for us to maximize the volumes allowable in DMMU 1. And we could even do more if we wanted to do more core samples. Core samples are necessary for sediment analysis, chemical analysis. It's expensive to drill them. It's expensive to get them analyzed. You have to have a third-party analyst to do the chemical analysis. And so that's where we drew the line. We did not want to do additional core samples and incur any more of those additional expenses. But we did want to push DMMU 1 volumes to their maximum possible extent. And you probably can't see the little tiny number in the upper right-hand corner, but it's, and neither can I, it's 2454. 2,454 additional yards is what we have now applied in the DMMU limitation, and that's as much as you can possibly do without having to drill additional core samples and do all that other stuff. The red portion that you can see on the image, it should be familiar, the image should be familiar to you, is now been incorporated into the permit application. And discussions with the regulatory authorities have been held. They understand what we're doing. Their guidance was helpful in helping us know where the DMMU 1 limits were. And so this now is I think, a responsible action that we're taking to address the concerns that were raised last year and to take advantage of the opportunity afforded by the regulatory authority dysfunction. Yeah, and the second to the last bullet, if you're able to read it from where you're sitting, we are now going to, let me take your attention back one step. So that's the wrong step. If you look at the bottom image, the blue part is benefits from the natural scour, right? But once you get around the corner for a canal, you lose that opportunity. The benefit is gone, and all of the sediment that's going back and forth in the straight line is winding up kind of in the end of a canal, and so that's why another reason why it makes sense to focus our energy on this. And if we had more volume available in DMMU 1 and more funding and more time and more engineering and all that stuff, we could have extended that red further up around the corner. But this maximizes the capability of our budget, it maximizes the capability of our permit, and it's just as much as we can possibly do without basically, I don't want to say starting over again, but well, that's what it means to me. So now we're hoping to include, if you can't read the lots 88 through 94 are actually those which are most negatively impacted by the ebb and flow, the sediment in a canal. And at this point, it's our intention to consistently dredge to a -4 throughout the entire canal system. There are a lot of assumptions underlying that. We're going to manage those assumptions on a regular basis. I think Mark is going to be talking more about that later. But at this point, another part of the silver lining is that we now have a little bit more time. So any of you or any other members that you might know who want to have maintenance done on their dock and they want to do it strictly by the book and legally, you now have the opportunity to take advantage of the engineering that MSA has done on behalf of the Cove, some of which I'll say can be leveraged in a kind of copy-paste mechanism to create permit applications for private members who want dock work done or marine structures of any kind. And but moreover, I mean, if you look at the dredge cost model that Karen's going to show you, mobilization for the dredger is $250,000 just to move the equipment up here. So if you have maintenance on your marine structures that you want done, you can really pretty much eliminate the mobilization expense from your project by taking advantage of Blackwater being here to do the canals. So with that, I'll turn it over to Karen.
Okay. This schedule that you see up there is what we use to estimate the dredge costs. And you'll notice it says updated dredge cost estimate because this thing is constantly being updated. All of these numbers are estimates and they will change. But we go with what we know to date, and that's what this is, and hopefully it's not, because we're getting close. We're getting pretty close to the actual. On the upper right-hand section are the costs for the engineering and the permitting. Those costs, what I want to kind of discuss is the changes. If you've seen this before, the changes from then to now. One of the changes in the permitting costs are $23,650 that we needed to get the permit or added to the permit, that section in Canal A that we're now going to pick up. By the way, we still don't have the permit. It's still in the process of trying to get it. And there's also a little 12,000 something in there that really we haven't contracted for, but is sitting out there that we might be stuck with. So we're trying to make these numbers, we'll call them conservative, and that means we're sort of inflating them to worst case, so that we make sure that we have enough money to pay for these things. One big change that we made to this estimate is the overdredge factor. We had 50% to begin with, and thinking about it, that really is it's not going to be that high. John can better understand the depth from going from 12 inches to 9 inches in the overage. But anyway, we decided that 37.5% was a better number than 50, so it's a little less conservative. And the column sort of in the middle to the left is the cost of the actual dredge. And these numbers are pretty good because we are working from an actual bid for doing the dredge now, or actually would have been over by now, this last winter. We got $250 for the mobilization, as we just talked about. The dredge volume for the entrance, we actually had 2,600 there earlier, and then realized, well, part of that is this dredge after 5 years, so we can knock that back down. And I might point out the $2,950 cost versus the $3,750 is our contractor said that he'd take $8 a cubic yard off of the cost if we do beach nourishment, which is what we do with the entrance dredged. The rest of it has to be hauled away. So we've got the dredge volume, that didn't change. This 700 is not here because this is just representing what's going to happen this year and next year. And the 700 will be done 5 years from now, or from next year. And the 37.5 is the overdredge volume that has gone down from our original estimate because of the 50 versus the 37.5. Okay, so these are numbers that we worked out as the dredge is going to cost if we had done it this year. And we have to figure, well, there's inflation, it's going to cost us more next year. And that's what this other column is on the right. We've used a 4% inflation factor. We have been using for years 2.5%. And we were told by our reserve study ladies that is kind of low, and they recommended 4%. And of course, we see the inflation we're looking at now. We're hoping that 4%, it isn't more than that. But we'll see, because we do not know the actual numbers for next year. We are estimating. So anyway, all of those numbers have been increased by 4%. And we hope that's pretty reasonable. So the total, when we add up the permitting costs and the dredge cost, we've come up with about $1.9 million. And what's kind of interesting to me is when they started this, when Bob was involved in this to begin with, they figured about $2 million. That's pretty good. Okay, next slide. These are the impacts to the, because of the delay, we're able to do more things, but unfortunately, the more things are going to cost a bit more. The increase in the canal the dredge estimated at 4% is about $57,000. As I said, the $23,650 is the additional expense for the permitting, the various things that need to be done to get that extra little bit of Canal A into the permit. And originally, when we were looking at this, we decided not to do the fifth year dredge that is permitted that's included in the permit. And our thinking lately has been, well, that's kind of nuts because you've paid for the permitting on it. Let's go ahead and work that into the equation. So we've got $103,000 there. And then possible mitigation costs. This is another thing that's kind of come up, I believe recently, is that these mitigations, if you dig up the ground and under the water and you disturb stuff, that gives you negative points. And if you do certain things like this beach nourishment, you get some positive points. And when we started, well, a couple of weeks ago, it looked like we're going to be maybe up to having to pay $50,000. And when I did this, it's $15,000 because they charge you. I've forgotten what the dollar amount is, $1,000 for a point or something like that. They fine you essentially for these mitigation costs. Well, now it looks like maybe we're in a positive situation with our points. So we'll see how that ends up. But anyway, that's adding about $200,000 roughly to our original cost estimates. Now, we are in a better position doing this dredge a year later because we've got another year's worth of dues that we have collected, which kind of gets wiped out by these extra costs. And one of the things that has disappeared from our model is borrowing the $80,000 from docks. We don't need to do that. We don't think that is, but it's out there in case we do need, in case we come up short, we do have that. But we have to pay it back in about 3 years, which could be a little tight. Let me see here. Yeah, another thing about the dredges, we were doing a 5. We weren't going to do the one in 5 years. We were going to put them off 10 years, 10 years, 10 years. And looking at that mound of sand that we have out there now, that will be 7 years. And it's getting pretty high. So we thought we probably better go back to the 5-7 year cycle. The original permitting with the dredge, and then that permitting gives you another dredge in 5 years. And then we wait 7 and start all over again with the permitting and all that stuff. So that, okay, I think we can flip over to the next page. What we've talked about thus far has just been the next 2 years in money-wise. This is showing what percent, back one, this guy. Or have I got them in the wrong? Yeah, we'll do them this way. With the back one, maybe? That one. Thank you. That's okay. This shows the funding that the $1 million loan versus our reserves. Who's paying for this? These pieces. We're paying. We are personally, the Cove, paying for about 47%. We have 43 here, but it works out to about 47%. The loan that we've gotten from Columbia Bank, and it wasn't easy finding one because nobody wants to lend $1 million to a bunch of lots with no, without something they can come and carry away, like a car. They can't really take away our docks or our tennis courts. So anyway, we got this loan and we signed for it last August, thinking that we were going to need the money this year. At a 3.75 loan rate, and that's for the first 10 years, except that now it's going to be 8 years, and I'll explain that. And the rate for the last 5 years will change, and no doubt it will go up, and we'll just have to deal with that. Okay, the way it works is the mobilization will be up front, obviously, and the monthly billing is based upon surveys, and I think the plan is to deal with the dredger about weekly, make sure that what they are, well, anyway, that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. The payments will be made directly to the contractors. We'll submit the paperwork and they will pay. The money won't be flowing through our coffers at all. The construction loan will be converted to a term at the end of the construction period. The construction period of the current loan is 12 months, which is not going to work because that would be next August, and we're not going to have anything done. We haven't paid anything yet because we haven't borrowed anything. You have to pay interest during the construction period on whatever you borrow, and then you start making the payments, the principal and interest after it becomes a term loan after you're through. We are getting, the bank is quite willing to extend the construction period to 24 months, and that's in the process now. But what that means is we have one less year to pay the loan off, because the 15 years started when we signed the loan last August. So you subtract 2 years from being construction. Now we have 13 years to pay it off rather than 14, which means we have higher payments. Okay. And accelerated principal payments are allowed. We can pay it off early if we had the money. At this point, I don't think that we do. If people wanted to put in more money and pay it off earlier, that's fine. There's no prepayment penalties. There's no lien on properties. And this loan was approved in our annual meeting last May. Okay, now we go to that next page. One of the things we have to deal with is looking at this for the whole cove, all the finances, is over a 30-year period. That's required by the law and required by this reserve study that we have to have, both because of Washington laws and because of the bank loan. The loan payment will increase, and I figured this $5,388 a year. That will change some depending on when we actually convert the loan over, because we don't have to wait 24 months. If we finish up and want to, say, in May, convert it over, the payments would be a little bit less because you'd have more time to be making the payments. But anyway, there will be an increase in the loan payments. It looks like we're going to have to continue those targeted reserves a couple of years beyond the loan payoff. Ideally, it'd be nice to stop it as soon as the loan's paid off. But we have future entrance dredges that are a problem. As I said, we had 5 and 10-year intervals, or 10-year intervals, and we're going now to 5 and 7. And the way that we currently are modeling things using these numbers that we went through to begin with, that when we get to the end, we can pay for the 5th year entrance dredge, but it's the 7 years after that in our little model we show red reserves, meaning we don't have the money to pay for that. John has in here a little bit tight. I think it's going to be a little bit tight, but we'll see. And this 2034 is before the loan is paid off. It's a couple years before the loan's paid off. These additional costs, we've tried to be conservative coming up with them and maybe overestimate a little bit, and they will change. After we've had the FY23 dredge, it's been completed, we'll know a lot more. We'll have some very certain numbers. So worst case, possible that future waterways dues may have to increase. Well, normally we do 10% every 4 years, just on all the cost centers. We may have to increase the targeted reserves. And we won't have to do it next year. I figure if we have to do it, it'll be in FY24. It's looking like maybe $65 a lot a year. Hopefully we won't have to, but that's not a huge amount. We don't want to be a situation where we've got the canal all dredged off and nice and clean, but we can't get into it because we've got such a sandbar built up at the entrance, and we've got both pieces that we have to take care of. So we'll see. But I just wanted to give everybody a heads up. There may be a little bit more money we gotta get out of ourselves. So that's it for me.
In a minute, I'm going to ask Amy to give us an update on the permit, kind of where we are, describe the permit process and where we are, where we think we're going to end up, and maybe when. But I had a question come to me the other day as to how our committee works together with the trustees and with Amy and Blackwater and that. Waterways meets monthly. We have a regularly scheduled meeting, and there's a formal agenda and a list of topics that we go over, including financial piece. We have weekly, it's every Tuesday. We have a call, John and I have a call with Amy. Time is money, and we're cheap, okay? We can be blowing every penny we have on consultants, and we are very cautious of that. So we have a regular 1-hour Zoom meeting with Amy, and it's John and I, because we don't want a whole bunch of people there because it gets disruptive. Fred participates periodically, and so does Karen, okay? And then once this permit is issued, the pace will really begin to pick up, and we'll have a lot more contact certainly with MSA and then Blackwater as well, okay? And then a part of our obligation, I guess, our practice is to communicate progress along the way. So you should expect to hear more and more from us regularly as we get the permit, and then as we get our project started. Okay, so we can't do anything without a permit, and Amy, I'm going to hand you the mic.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, so hot seat, the permits. So like Mark said, there's a slew of environmental regulatory folks who you guys have to get permits from. Everybody has to get permits from. And it's been a little bit tough, not just because of COVID, but also because NOAA Fisheries, who is the main bottleneck of the permits for your particular project and many other projects, really adopted one of their new regulations about what Karen was mentioning, the mitigation. And the mitigation component in this permit process has delayed most projects in the Puget Sound probably 2 years. They are now, if you are not a federally funded project and you are a private entity that doesn't have a federal nexus, federal funding, then you have to go through this process. And this process is, I don't need to name off unless you really want me to, the 6 different agencies that you have to go through. But suffice it to say that NOAA Fisheries, when they adopted this new mitigation scenario, not only were they mandated to protect the population of the listed and endangered species in this area, which happens to be salmon, mostly, but they were also, what they just adopted over and above that, they adopted a conservation mandate, which required them to not just look at the salmon as protecting their populations so that they could continue to reproduce, but they were also protecting their habitat and anything that they might be impacted by. For example, the forage fish that they eat, or so really it was a habitat and the forage fish mostly. But in order to adopt that conservation mitigation plan, what they decided to do, because each individual project does not necessarily have the proper habitat to protect, they require you to either protect habitat or those forage fish or pay into a system like Karen was mentioning, a conservation bank, a mitigation bank, or even one of the many not jurisdictions, but nonprofit organizations now, such as Puget Sound Partnership, or if you're in the Hood Canal Coordinating Council, who provide opportunities for people who have projects in the nearshore environment to pay to do this restoration work or conservation work. Fortunately, I'm going to say the good stuff first. Fortunately for you guys, there's a lot of bang for your buck for beach nourishment, or putting, like Mark was talking about, putting that sediment that you're taking from the entrance channel, because that is coarser sand than the inside of the canals where it's mucky and muddy, right? So you want to take that nice coarse sand material and cobble and put that back on the beach. We had to test and make sure it was clean. There's a lot of criteria that you have to pass through, but putting that material back on the beach has made it so you have a positive number of credits rather than debts. And that, for many projects in the nearshore environment, creates quite a bit of turmoil. There's some project some projects that cost almost 3 times more than what the actual physical construction of the project costs, based on this conservation mitigation. And so you guys are sitting nicely in the fact that you have this beach nourishment potential. So that's a real boon. All right, now the bad side. NOAA Fisheries is the bottleneck. You have permits from every one of the other regulatory agencies except for Washington State Department of Natural Resources and NOAA. Washington State Department of Natural Resources is waiting for you to get your NOAA permit before they will issue you your what they call a right of entry permit. At this point, though, with NOAA, they've asked a lot of questions, we've had a lot of meetings, they finally, and maybe I should just go back just briefly and say, last year, when we were expecting to get the permits from NOAA, we were really expecting to get the permits from NOAA. We had no idea they were going to take so darn long to even review projects. And most of it is because this conservation calculator that I'm talking about is new to them as well as the rest of the Puget Sound. And there were a lot of questions, and they didn't really know how to manipulate it. And we asked a lot of questions because it seemed, frankly, quite heinous in their requirements for a lot of the nearshore projects. We thought that people were going to just do their projects and not ask for permits, and that was counterintuitive to what they were seeking. So NOAA has taken a long time. We fully anticipated getting those permits, and we probably sent, between me and, well, probably me and the rest of the folks in my office, 50 emails trying to get some updates, and it took months and months and months to even get a response because they just didn't know what they were doing. Now, they have fully reviewed your project. Good news, we got some responses. We had deadlines here with Mariners Cove. We kept saying, all right, if we don't hear by November 1, all right, if we don't hear by Thanksgiving, and we had to have that threshold to determine whether or not we were going to postpone the dredge based on the dredger's capabilities or postpone it for a year. Well, it turns out that that threshold was passed by months before we even heard a response from NOAA. So there's no question about postponing it. Now, once they finally got back to us, they wanted our interaction and responses to their comments within 2 weeks. That's all been done. We added this new area in the canal to the north to the maximum that was allowed within the regulatory review agencies. And now we are waiting for NOAA to do what's called a biological opinion. I won't go into details. You, along with 13 other projects, are in this one batch, and they're writing up their determinations to send to some of the other federal review agencies. Once they do that, and we know they're in the throes of doing that right now, because again, they're not responding, so that we know their head is down and they're working very hard. And they're going to get back to us inevitably within this month of March, I'm assuming. Again, I've sent several emails out to try and just get a feel for where they are, but it's black and white. They're either going to respond with an answer or not respond at all. So we're hoping, but we have our feelers out, you know, through the back door to find out what's going on, and they are in the middle of writing up this document. And once that happens, there's only one step left, 2 steps left. One step is to work through the calculator and make sure they concur with our findings, which is that you're in the positive. And the second step is to send that along to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and issue the permit. So we're really close. The plan again is to do this dredge at the end of the year. And I'll bet anyone in here $100 that you'll have it. Okay.
That's good. Okay, we're going to talk about how this, kind of logistics around this dredge, but before I do, so we get this permit. The canal system, the community was built in 1965. Never, other than the entrance, the canals have not been dredged. In our lifetimes, all of our lifetimes, this is the last time the main canals will be dredged. Now, there will need to be another dredge. These areas that are not, we're not picking up right now, okay, as you're around the corner toward the cofferdam, those can't be ignored. And so our priority now is to get this dredge accomplished and take advantage of all the work that's been completed, all the money that's been spent, all the efforts at permitting. Once we get that done, then we need to go back and look at what is next. And that'll include a funding strategy and see how the community feels about all of that, what they're willing to support. But in no way please don't in no way get a sense that we're done, we're out of here. We're not, okay? There will still be additional work to be done in the future. Okay, so here's how this will occur. There are two parts of the dredge, two physical areas, geographical areas, and they're handled in different ways. If you, over the last month or so, the equipment's been pulled now. Oak Harbor Marina had some seawall damage, and they had American Construction in with their big crane, cable, and clamshell unit. They were repairing the seawall in that, but that's some of the same equipment. American has dredged the entrance in the past, where you recall a big barge and a small tug sits on spuds, these poles that are lowered down, and then you have a big crane suspending by cable a clamshell, and it goes over to the shallow areas, and then it releases, it drops it with a lot of force, closes up, and then brings it up and deposits the mud on the barge, okay? That's how the entrance will be done. And we're planning on roughly 1,900 cubic yards removed from the entrance that way. Inside the canals, that's different, okay? There's no room, there's not the width to bring those big barges in. And customarily in smaller areas, if you ever visited La Conner Marina when they were doing that, they use claw types. They're hydraulic. The unit has tractor treads, like Caterpillar treads. They drive it up on the barge or on a barge, and it goes out, down, and scoops up, and then over and drops, okay? My neighbor Larry is very familiar with those. That's how the entrance will be done. The volume and the contour, it's all mapped out. It's surveyed first with a bathymetric survey where they send pulses down and they can map the depths of the entire canal system, the slopes and the bottom. And then that information is fed into a computer where the operator of the dredge, of that equipment, he sees that, and with a combination of laser level, he can monitor his depth, and GPS, physical location. He can come right in and take material out. So we've met with 3 or 4 dredging contractors, and all of them have explained to us the benefit of this computerized means of excavation. There are a couple of terms. You heard overdredge. We plan to take, I think the base is, what is it, 16,000, is that the? 16,800. Yeah, 16,800 yards. That's the specification. But there's a term called overdredge, and that's roughly 50% of that base calculation, and that's assigned, the reason for that is due to some of the uncertainty around what's actually down there when the equipment moves. how deep that guy actually goes is a little deeper than he's supposed to. So there's an allowance called overdredge, 50%. And there's another additional allowance called contingency. It's another 20%. So as we first started working with that, we were kind of pleased. You know, boy, we really don't have a lot to worry about here. We should be able to accomplish everything that we need to under this permit, under that first application that was turned, or the first plan that was approved. And then when we said, you know, we're going to do more in a canal, how are we going to accomplish that? Let's manage overdredge and contingency really carefully. And so we went back to George, the experts there. He said, yeah, we can be generally pretty accurate here. Will we make a mistake occasionally? Sure. But yeah, we can be comfortable with that. So that's where we are, okay? We're going to run from roughly 17,000 to 23,000 cubic yards of material from the canals. That's going to be disposed in a local quarry. I don't know exactly the one. George Lullam has already worked all of that out. He actually has a trucking company that he's worked with as well. It's all going to be dug out, loaded on a tilted barge where it can be drained. A lot of that water drained out. It won't be dry by any means, but it won't be as sloppy as might be otherwise. We've had a couple of property owners volunteer the use of their lots where the trucks can come in, back right in. The barge will be pushed right adjacent to shore. Those trucks can be loaded. We're talking roughly 20-25 combos a day, truck and pup, truck and trailer combinations a day going out. I mentioned I kind of did this in my past life. I actually called Fred Camp down in McMinnville, Oregon yesterday to confirm with him. And he said, Mark, you can get a certain amount of volume in these truck and trailer units, but what's really going to be important is weight, okay? You can't judge it just on volume. Weight will control everything. So we won't know until we start, until we see what these things weigh out. So that's roughly the number of trucks that we're going to be talking about. We realize that one of the reasons we can afford to do this dredge is by trucking the material out, not putting it on a barge, a transfer barge, transferring it to a big barge offshore, and then taking it clear out into Rosario Strait. That's expensive, and if it's stormy, they can't operate, and we can't get things done as efficiently as we would like. So one of the compromises we have is, and it's actually good, load it in a truck, take it out. They can be moving without disruption. Even when it's raining, when the wind's blowing, they should be able to keep doing that. We got to figure out how to keep the streets clean, and we're not going to ignore that. So we've actually been talking with George and the trucking company, and maybe we need to rent a small sweeper or something. Maybe we get some folks out with brooms that are willing to help, because we want to keep our community clean, okay? I got a volunteer right there, John. Super. Okay, and then lastly, we need everybody. There's a role for darn near everybody here. Fred, you want to tell them about it? Here you go.
Doesn't like chasing me with the camera. Okay. You can well imagine the logistics nightmare that's going to be around this operation. And we're planning on hopefully having some more informational meetings the closer we get to the manifestation of this project. And hopefully we'll have George available, and we'll have a real plan put in place at that time from the contractor is exactly what and how he's going to orchestrate this thing. But in the interim, we really need private boat docks. I have a project coming this summer where I'm going to redo A dock. And unfortunately, I've already filled B dock up, so I don't have those logistic points. So in trying to do the rework and the retrofit and the work to A dock, I'm going to need some places to put some boats and to be able to move things around. But even just for the dredge, We need as many of the private docks as possible so that we can evacuate or clear a canal so those barges can get in and get out. We're hoping that the owners will be available to move those boats or those vessels at that time, and that's when we have that plan put together, and we'll communicate all that to you when it gets down to the nitty-gritty of it. But just keep in mind, if you have a trailerable boat during that timeline, please put it on the trailer and pull it out of the canal so we don't have to deal with it. If you've got the larger boats, then please let me know what your availability is and whether or not you'll be able to move that vessel. We'll be there to help and coordinate that. If you don't want to turn the key on it or you can't, then we'll have the support boats to be able get out there to be able to do that and try to facilitate that. Again, as many of those private docks as we possibly can get or get identified as a place where we can move a boat on an interim basis would be much, much appreciated. Don't want to have to move boats unless I have to. So if there's inclement weather or wind or anything like that, no bueno for tacos. We ain't doing it. So put your mind at ease there. I won't even begin to pursue that. So, and I'll have a team, hopefully, of volunteers and other folks where we can get together with the dinghies and the smaller boats to facilitate that move. Anything else, Mark?
Thank you very much, Fred. Okay, so now we're going to change subject just a bit. As we mentioned several times, the delay in the dredge has opened up this opportunity to accomplish quite a bit of work. There'll be a lot of sunk costs of having equipment on site, and so those costs are there no matter what we do. Let's take advantage of that, and anybody that needs a dock or pilings, when the docks were repaired or replaced in a canal, Penny and I had our creosote pilings sleeved, and it worked out really well. And again, we were able to take advantage of that. So that's the opportunity. Time is of the essence, and Amy and Brian are going to talk about that. The way we would like to set this up is we want the relationship to be and the work to be between the property owner and the contractor, okay? And so MCBC doesn't want to be involved in overseeing construction on private property, okay? That will be their problem, their role in this. So Amy, I'm going to hand this to you, and if you could kind of talk a little bit about what we got in mind and your two firms.
Yeah, just to clarify, Brian and I work together, but Brian is helping out Blackwater. We're both from Marine Surveys and Assessments, and Marine Surveys and Assessments is a company that has been around for since 1999, when I was 24 years. And we've been doing this near-shore, in-water, Puget Sound work for a long time, and it started out with docks and marinas and piling and all of that stuff. So, yeah, John, if you want to, I don't know if you want to scroll to any of, well, I'm not sure where you want me to talk about what, but we do have the potential to help folks who would like to, and I want to clarify because one of the next slides which says member private piling replacement dock construction repair. If you are planning on building a new structure or new, I think it's the next one. Or try it. Okay, whatever. That's the same? Okay. New structures are probably not going to be permitted quickly enough to take advantage of the mobilization of Blackwater, because new structures are a whole different kind of permit. You can still take advantage of, we have been, for this dredge project, we have dived the entire canal system, and we have a lot of data that we would need to incorporate into whatever new permits that you're applying for, that we can plagiarize from the Dredge project. And that's the benefit. And obviously, every permit, according to these regulatory folks, has to be new, but that doesn't mean we can't use the research and some of the habitat information that we've already collected. But I do want you to keep in mind, and that's typically for a pile replacement, a float replacement, a ramp replacement, or anything like that, where everything is going to be in the same footprint. If you have a new overwater footprint, we can still use or cut and paste, as John has said, some of the data, but the permit process is going to take you longer. So it's not likely to be able to take advantage of the mobilization. So, what you wanted me to talk about? Is that good? Okay. Brian's
Gonna add a little bit. So yeah, I think I've met a few of you, but my name's Brian DeCaterina. I've been involved with this project for at least, for about 5 years. Is that better? Yeah. So I am our lead scientific diver for marine surveys and assessments, and I think I've met a few of you on site when we were doing our eelgrass transplant. I've been involved with the core sampling, and so anyway, I've kind of followed this project, not since the beginning, but through a lot of the milestones in the last few years of permitting. But yeah, George has asked that we come, he couldn't be here, but that, we just relay kind of what Amy was saying, that a lot of the cost savings that happen in marine construction and the permitting and the biology, as you can, understand that these projects are pretty intricate as far as the permitting is required. And I think the more people that kind of go into these things around the same timelines, there can be huge cost savings. So I think it's, it behooves the entire group, if there are folks that are looking to do projects, to kind of lump them all together. And we can do a lot of the permit applications, which will be ostensibly kind of the same application. So yeah, I think George left some materials that are up here, and we have some of our business cards, but marine surveys and assessments would handle all of the biology and the permitting, and George at Blackwater would handle all the construction and the engineering that's involved in doing pile replacement, bulkhead replacement, overwater structure. And this isn't to say that we have to do in the same footprint, but what Amy's saying is that when you rebuild in the same footprint or in the same spots that existing things are, it doesn't go under what they call formal consultation as far as the regulation, and it's a much more expedited permit process. So we just wanted to relay that there is huge cost savings. So if there are folks that are looking to have this kind of construction done, this is the time to kind of think about it and maybe talk to your neighbors, and because these processes aren't cheap, but they can be much cheaper if it's done in congruation with other projects. So yeah, I think that's all I have. But anyway, we're up here and we have some literature and some business cards, so we're happy to talk if other folks are interested in having some marine construction done.
Let me take advantage of an opportunity here. Actually, some time ago, we asked Amy for input on how much do you think it's going to cost if we have a private dock-owning community member who wants to do something? How much will a permit cost? And as she's already alluded, plagiarization of the MCBC dredge documentation is okay, and so we're more than happy to make that available for people who want to take advantage of it. I don't know if you can read this, but I'll describe it as best I can. For anybody that wants to do, if there's one person in the community who wants to get a permit for marine structure maintenance for their private dock, it's probably going to cost about $9,500. That means that MSA could take the artifacts that have been created for the dredge, plagiarize from them to create a permit application on behalf of that private member. If two people want to do it, well, to take that initial private member permit and plagiarize that for the second member is not going to be $9,500. It's probably only going to be about $36.50 or so. And those are the numbers and they're rough order magnitude, nothing detailed about this, but this is just to give people a sense of the opportunity that we have to do some collective bargaining, take advantage of some synergy. So in the little bar chart down on the bottom, you can see if one person takes advantage of the Dredge artifacts, it's going to be $9,500. If two people do it, then they can split the total cost, and it's only going to be about $8,400 each. If three people do it, well, they can split the total cost, and it's only going to be about $6,800. And you can see that it only takes 4 or 5, maybe 6 people before you get to a permit expense that's 50% of what it would be if you were on your own. This has nothing to do with the cost for the Blackwater's cost. This is just the permitting costs. And so I got Amy's permission to share this, and hopefully she approves of the way I just presented it. But this is an example of the opportunity that's available for private lot owners who have maintenance that they need to perform on their marine structures.
All right. I think we're about ready to move to Q&A. I think I've given you a pretty good sense of the project, where we are, what we have planned, where the opportunities are for homeowners here. And so now we'll open it up for questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Wait till we hand you the microphone, and if you remember your name, I know you'll remember your name, but you remember your lot number, and then please ask your question, okay?
Testing.
What's your name?
What's my name?
Yeah.
Bob Lundstrom. I've got a question on, or just a comment on the permitting for Amy for the dock work. Do they need to do a JARPA? And so how long will that rough estimate of time take for a JARPA for a private party?
Yeah, well, what we need to complete a JARPA is a design or a bit of information about what you've got and what you want to replace. So once we have that information, that doesn't take much time. It's not just a JARPA, though. You're going to need to have a lot of other permit applications. That also includes mitigation as part of whatever you're doing. So how long, do you mean how long will the permit process take?
Yeah, so
Yes.
what I'm getting at, Amy, you can see where I'm going, right?
Yeah, right.
There's going to be in my mind, for all the people who are thinking about this, there's going to be a straggler or two say, well, I turned in and now you're telling me I'm not going to get my permit in time, and there's going to be, you're going to rough up somebody. So my suggestion is there should be a cutoff date that should be established, that if you don't get your JARP or your request in by this date, do not anticipate that you're going to have any work done on that you're anticipating.
Well, I would probably like to be even a little more conservative than that. We are in March. The dredge is proposed to occur in November. There is no guarantee that anyone will get a permit. There is a guarantee that you can use a lot of this data that has already been collected for your permit application. But knowing what we know about the 8 agencies that are going to have to review your project, unless it is a small project and you're just replacing a piling or replacing a float or replacing your ramp, which is going to be a much higher likelihood of being able to get that permit by the time Blackwater is in here, it's unlikely, like I said, if it's a new structure, unlikely you're going to get in there. Now, in terms of a cutoff date, because I can't guarantee any permit, that would be foolish of me. I don't know what cutoff date that would be. I do know that the sooner you get that information to us, like this week, last week, then more likely it will be that you can get a permit in time. But there is no guarantee. The benefit, again, is to be able to use, as John says, the artifacts from some of the data that we've already collected and the dive work that we've already done for the dredge work.
Amy?
It would be great if we could get the permit.
So what's the life of the permit?
Well, every agency has a different validity length of time, but the minimum amount is 2 years.
Okay, so that means that if you miss the Blackwater dredge, that you're going to have mobilization. If you want something done, you're going to have to pay for it as a lot owner. You're going to have to pay for that yourself, and you're going to have to pay for having that moved in.
Yeah, and so, you can, let's say we start on the permits and we do all the applications and they're turned in, because it does take us some time to do, and nobody really, we don't have any, we have 40 projects we're working on, right? So let's say we're able to get these documents submitted by mid-April and nobody gets permitted. Still, if you have a higher number of people who are applying for permits at once, you can still all share the mobilization costs, and it's a different cost, very likely, than the dredging mobilization cost, because they're probably smaller equipment.
I'd like to add on to that. So we know that there's going to be a second entrance dredge in 5 years. Is it likely that the useful life of the permit that the private dock owner got lasts that long?
The federal government, the federal agencies have a permit that lasts 5 years. The state agencies are more like 2, and the county are 1 or 2. So if you want to wait for another 2 years, you can do that. On the other hand, the permit process in the Puget Sound is not getting easier and easier.
So Amy, what's the life of your data?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because typically dive data is only valid for 1 year. But because inside the canals, really for all intents and purposes, there was nothing but mud, we have not attempted to use that data because nobody's applied, but we're assuming that a dive won't be required. That will have to be determined at once. And again, if we have to do another dive, for example, and there's 5 to 8 people who want to do that work, we can do that in 1 day rather than coming out 8 different times. Our small mobilization cost.
I just want to add one thing to that. And also, just so that everyone understands, the process that accompanies these biological permit applications is a biological report. And that's a lot of mainly what we're doing. The data that we collect goes into a biological report. And I think that's what I see as a huge cost savings, because essentially they end up being the same exact thing for every person in the cove that's applying. There's biologically not a whole lot of different variations of what's happening. So, the data may need to be recollected in some way, but we could split the mobilization costs of our surveyors to come out once, and so all that would be split amongst everyone. But the report is where I think huge cost savings happen. So it's just the idea is that people are just lumping the projects into one. Yeah.
So I have one last question.
Please.
What's the life on your data? When did you collect that data, and how old is it?
So the data that we did for Mariner's Cove, we've done a couple different surveys, but traditionally when we were looking at eelgrass, which is a federally listed endangered species, that specifically they want to see that done every year. So when we had done that, we turned in the data within 1 year. That's not saying that from when the permit was issued, but it's just we submitted a permit application at least 1 year after the data was collected. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Let me just clarify. We have to submit our data within 1 year of when the dive was done, but that's for eelgrass. When you have the inside canals where there really is just mud, because we don't have any permit applications we're attempting to do now, we do not know if they're going to say no problem, just use the data you've collected. We know that there's nothing in there. They very well might say that, or they might say, go take a survey, and that's again where it behooves more people to join in than just one.
I have a question. Nobody else does. So you've provided great information. As I understand, there's like two parts of this. There's the permitting cost you're going to have, then there's the engineering and construction cost. And the engineering and construction cost is Blackwater. So do we have any idea, linear foot, pilings, ramps, approximately what those pieces would cost to replace? Like, is there any sort of, like, you've given us a good idea of what to expect in terms of permitting, but I don't have any idea what to expect in terms of construction and engineering.
We just had some, John and I'm sure I did, some very high-level discussion with George, because we wanted to be able to tell people that our last time we were together in this room. And I think he said something like, it's going to be like, tell them 15,000 a piling or something like that. I think we just need to, property owners need to deal directly with George Lowland from Blackwater. He should be able, he'll be in a much better position to take a look at it, run the dimensions, and provide some very close numbers that he's comfortable with.
And where can we get the contact information?
I can't recall.
Okay.
Cindy?
Good? Oh, good. Okay, hi. Cindy, lot 123. A couple questions, please. So do you or does anyone have a list, like a checklist, of all the permits sequentially needed? Because I ran into issues with building the house that one thing had to be done before another, so it's kind of silly to spend time on JARPA or whoever if we have to do 5 other people ahead of them. Does anyone have a list for us to use? Yes?
It's a little more intricate than just giving a list, because it depends on comments and other things like that. But John is providing this slide about the process.
Okay. All right. If I live long enough to do that, are there enough people that are building brand new, as I will be from start, that it's worth us getting together as a group and kind of filling out our documents in group instead of us all kind of struggling? Just throwing it out there. I'm it. Oh, okay, got it. So, and do I understand then, before there was a slide talking about doing an entryway in 2023, there's nothing happening in 23? Entryway
I was
dredge?
going to answer one of the questions, and then the 2023 is when your dredges. 2022, 2023
okay,
is
gotcha.
when the entrance and the canals are going to be. But in terms of your documents, certainly anybody is absolutely able to fill out any of your permit applications. You are required, though, to have a biologist identify the biological document, which is a biological evaluation or something called a regional general permit. But all of the permit applications at the county or the state level, if people want to do that on their own and save money, they're certainly welcome to. We might, if you use us to do the biology, which you're certainly not obligated to do, we could certainly help edit anything that's been written down in those permit applications.
I wanted to thank the committee for the outstanding work they've done. They have obviously, a group of volunteers are doing very professional work here. I would also say the fact that you were able to find a way to accommodate the people on a canal who were largely left out of this, really shines. But next, getting that last permit, have we thought about a letter writing campaign to our congressional representatives? I would suggest a list of points that we include in those letters and 50 letters to Larson, who will definitely then call NOAA, might be a good way to pry this thing loose. Because if we go another year, how soon is it going to be before the studies we've already done time out and we have to duplicate them?
Yeah, let me just, I was trying to encourage Mark to talk about the letter that was sent to, I'm not sure who it was, but the congressional representatives from California, Oregon, and Washington got together and on behalf of the marine industry sent letters to some of the regulatory authorities in Washington stating that the industry is stalled because you guys aren't doing your job. And I think that kind of sounded to me like what you were describing, although maybe at a higher level than anything we could generate.
1 letter versus 50 letters for people that vote for the guy
Yeah.
is much more useful. And we ought to include things like, what do we have invested in this thing for every lot owner in Mariners Cove, and what do we have at stake, and how long have we been waiting for the permit? And these agencies have a statutory requirement to respond to inquiries by a certain date. They're obviously not making those. So as a congressional representative, we can say, you need to go to this agency and say, live up to your statutory requirements.
I would like to just respond to some of the other components of your question, which is once you submit applications for your project, then your data is vested. So there's no potential for having your data and your dive work or any of that lost due to the length of time that the agencies take to review it. So you don't have to worry about that. On the other hand, keep in mind that the pressure that came on high from Department of Defense or whomever to NOAA, what that made happen is for them to shorten the period of time within which they were willing to talk to us and make sure they really knew about the projects well, because they're feeling the pressure because they have taken a long time. But I'm not sure it's really to your advantage at this moment, because the pressure that they're putting is basically, for example, they asked us for a lot of details. We're trying to finalize increasing the amount of dredge that was going to occur in that new area in Canal A. And they almost kicked you out of this review batch because we didn't respond to them within a couple of days, even though they had taken years to respond to us because they have such pressure from up high. So they are in process. I'm not sure if that's the right thing to do now, but that's just my opinion, and your data's vested.
Just a bit to add. We, as a committee, we talked about it, and I went as far as to put a draft together and research the contacts, and then Amy kind of described, I don't know that you were involved in the conversation at that point, Amy, but we feel that we're really pretty close to getting it now. They're starting to see some movement, we're getting resolution, and we believe that we will get this thing done. George shared the letter from the delegation to these agencies, and it was sharp. It was from the Marine Trades Association, all the big shipyards and everybody, and the coast on down. So that's where we are.
Bob Lundstrom, is it necessary, Amy, to set the date out there at 12/1 due to foraging fish issues or DNR issues? Can that date be moved back towards more like September?
No, you have to abide by work windows, and so the answer is no.
So you had to apply for the window of 12/1 to 2/1.
You know, I don't remember your work window specifically. I don't remember if it started earlier and
The-
then took a stop, and then, is there a work window here?
The work window for the entrance,
12/1. Yeah, February 15th or February 1? 15th. Yeah, I think it's 12/1 to February 15th. And then there was some discussion about the potential, I know we've talked about this a bunch before, and all the different closures and which ones we could discuss to extend. There's a potential to extend the work window if it is bull trout. There's a lot of justifications that could be made to extend it for that. But for forage fish, not as easily, unless we do a lot of forage fish surveys to identify whether or not there are if there's spawning activity, but unlikely you can change it for Chinook.
you know, I hate to disagree with you because I look back on the Dredge apps that we did in 2009, 10, and also 15. And I was curious as to that non-dredge date. And it seems to me that the dredge window is open once we passed June, and it goes, we have a dredge window here on the outside, I think from June until we get to December 30th or roughly the 1st of January. And then it closes down again. So I would invite everybody, you guys, to take another look at that, because our better weather is in September, October. And it is much more conducive for moving boats. It's much more conducive for everything around here. And it's after crab season, so nobody's going to be really harmed by getting in there and getting the muddy water.
Yeah, Bob, you bring up a good question, and I know Mark has taken notes, and we will look at it again. But I do want to say that as we approached the drop dead deadline for 2021 dredge start, we asked that question: when can we start? How late can we start? How early can we start? When do we have to finish? Can we get an extension till March? You know, we have had this conversation 2 or 3 or 4 times, and it's worth having it again. So I don't mean to dismiss what you're asking, because I think it's really important.
Yeah, well, and I think it's more than DNR. I think it's WDFW, and that's who you have to look at.
It's also the Corps of Engineers has their own windows, as does everybody has their own windows. So yes, you have to abide by all.
Yeah, thank you.
Questions? Steve?
Hi, Steve Hahn. I think I look pretty silly with this down around my neck. But anyway, Steve Hahn, I don't remember my lot numbers. 83 or 84 or 84, 85. I always get lost. Anyway. To start, just to follow on to that last conversation, so you identified end of March, month into March, expectation of action, response from the agency. Keeping track, and then you indicated there's a couple more steps that they have to do beyond that, and then there's the DNR who follows on to that. You showed that really complicated web of action that has to happen, and if I understood it, these are like the last pieces to fall into place there. But the point is that, and the point that Bob was making, to my understanding, is getting the timing on all these to line up. It's proved to be very difficult. It's great to have confidence, and John was willing to take your $100 bet. It shows that it's not a done deal, and so monitoring and having forecasts of if this piece doesn't fall into place by this date, then we're in trouble, right? And especially if we're down to just a handful of pieces left to fall into place, putting together that kind of a schedule, although it's likely not to be a linear schedule, but kind of a web as the picture shows, but understanding, where's the drop dead on each of those pieces and knowing when they miss, so that then you can take the remedial action, you can take up on the letter writing campaign, whatever action makes sense at that point in time, and thinking about what those remedial actions would be ahead of time so that you're not fully reactive when you because, let's $100 bet aside, I would probably take the bet that something is still likely to go wrong before we get to the finish line. That's just my pessimism showing, I think. But anyway, so for what it's worth, offered for your consideration.
Well, I'd like to talk to that a little bit. So when we were trying to force this dredge into 2021, we did build what's called a critical path schedule. I did a critical path analysis. We modeled best case, worst case. We assigned task durations that we thought were conservative in terms of, okay, so let's say NOAA Fisheries gets our permit by this Friday. It's got to go to ACOE. How long is it going to take to do that? Well, it should only take 24 hours. We gave it a week. Then after ACOE, then you have to have a dredge management meeting, a DMO meeting with the dredger, these guys, everybody. How long does it take to schedule that? Well, probably a day. Well, let's give that a week. And you only gave it a week. A week was incredibly aggressive, but if we were going to get started by December 1st, 2021, that's what we felt needed to happen. So we've actually not shared any of that level of detail here, but trust me, we've done it. And we have used risk management techniques throughout the entire process.
And I'm taking away that you're going to continue to do that going forward because the schedule is still critical until we get it actually done. So perfect, thank you. And that's a good segue to thank you. Another response from the last meeting was I've noticed, although I haven't dug into them in detail yet, that you've posted a lot of additional material up on the website. So thank you for that. That was one of my requests is I think, not everyone wants to dig into the details, but having the details available for anyone who cares to dig into them, I think that's important for this kind of a stakeholder organization. So thanks for that. And then echo the thanks that were mentioned a minute ago that, clearly this is an overwhelmingly complicated task and everyone is putting in a lot of work. It's very obvious and it's greatly appreciated. And certainly the addition of the ADOC work, I think that's outstanding. So thank you for that specifically. That said, I would like to correct the characterization of the request that was made at the last meeting. It was not specific to add the additional ADOC. It was to add the rest of the canal. Even the areas that we talked about here that are presumed to be getting this scouring effect, my own observation for where our dock sits says that we have quite a bit of additional sedimentation compared to the 2014 bathymetry. So we're not getting those areas at this point, and I understand and accept that it's not realistic to add those to the dredge plan at this point. At the same time, certainly my intent, and I won't presume to what anyone else was trying to say at the last meeting, but my own intent was not just to add those additional ADOC areas, although again, kudos for getting that done, but to also get our area specifically back down to the -4 level. That was my personal target. So I want to highlight that and while you've done outstanding work, it has not yet reached that target level. So just add that to the mix. Maybe that gets scoured now that the other areas get down, but that's just driving the sentiment, and that'll make our next dredge come just that much sooner. So I don't know what the plan is. I'm curious what the plan is, but not today. I understand that. Thanks so much.
Well, I mentioned earlier that our goal is to get this dredge done, and then we need to go to work on addressing the other areas, and we'll certainly do that. That's part of responsibility, right, to represent all the property owners. We talked a little bit about communication. I wanted to be sure to recognize John, Mary, Larry, the great work you do to help on the website, to help with Nextdoor, to help me with my communications. It's very much appreciated. Any other questions? So again, one of the big points here of this meeting, if you are interested in any of the additional work on your properties, a good thing to get started. You've got contact people here that can help you with that. Regarding mobilization, when they sleeved the pilings over in A Canal, there was not a huge barge or anything like that. They can bring smaller equipment to do construction on smaller docks, so don't be intimidated by that. The important thing is to get the permitting started if you're serious about getting it done. It's getting harder and harder. Any other questions?
And water and tea over there, so if you want to talk, you want to commiserate with the board or whoever, don't hesitate. Restrooms are down the hall to the left. And thank you for coming out.
Thanks, everybody.